Spring is always sold as a fresh start. Open the windows, let the light in, shake off the winter gloom. But horror knows better, because the moment the world starts looking alive again, that's when the weird stuff starts moving under the surface. Eggs hatch, old urges wake up, parasites wriggle loose, buried things decide they're not as buried as everyone hoped. This week in horror history is full of that exact energy. Flesh that won't behave, desire that turns feral, stories about stories that get cursed just by being told, a city collapsing under viral panic, and one of horror's all-time great lessons getting another reminder. When the dead come back, they do not come back friendly. So, keep the shovel out of the ground, don't trust anything slimy, and if somebody says the prank has gone too far, believe them. Welcome back to This Week in Horror History. I'm your host, Enrique Couto, and today we're talking about March 30th through April 5th. Coming up, a nasty little alien plague splatterfest that oozed into theaters and became a cult favorite. A sweaty, seductive New Orleans nightmare where sex and transformation are basically the same thing. A docuseries that asks whether horror productions are cursed or whether we just need the curse to be true. And a Stephen King remake that proved The Burial Ground still had plenty of box office life left in it. Then, right after the break, our deep cut spotlight, a Raccoon City panic sprint where every hall feels like you're already too late. March 31st, 2006, Slither opens in the United States, and immediately reminds everybody horror can be disgusting, funny, and weirdly lovable, all at the same time. James Gunn's first feature film as a director is pure goop cannon chaos. Alien parasites, small-town panic, mutant flesh, and Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer's own Michael Rooker, turning into the kind of problem you absolutely do not solve with polite conversation. What makes it stick is the tone. Slither is gross, sure, but it's also playful. It knows exactly how ridiculous its own nightmare is, and that confidence lets it swerve from genuine creature feature nastiness into laugh-out-loud madness without losing any momentum. At the box office, it underperformed, about $12.8 million worldwide on a $15 million budget. But this is exactly the kind of movie that found its real audience later, on disc, on cable, on streaming, and in the hearts of those who love their horror, slimy and mean. And of course, this was just the beginning of an incredibly prolific directing career for James Gunn. This was way before Guardians of the Galaxy, way before Superman, way before Peacemaker. And his work only got more interesting from here. I really recommend checking out his early oeuvre, especially the bizarre superhero film, aptly titled Super. It's a great watch. If you've never seen it or want to give it a nice revisit, there's a phenomenal Blu-ray available, and of course you can rent or buy it on the usual suspects like Amazon Prime Video, Apple TV, and Fandango at home. But bring a pre-moistened towelette. You'll need it. On April 2nd, 1982, Cat People prowls into theaters and gives us one of the sleekest, strangest studio horror films of the early 80s. This isn't subtle horror. This is elegant, erotic, dreamlike danger. You have black leopards, New Orleans heat, Giorgio Moroder's incredibly pulsing score, and a movie that treats desire like a curse waiting to pounce. The legendary Paul Schrader's remake of the 1942 classic is the kind of film that feels expensive and disreputable at the same time, which I mean as a strict compliment. It's glossy, weird, and absolutely committed to its own feverish mood. Commercially, it was a modest performer, but not a smash hit. Roughly $21 million worldwide on a reported $12.5 million budget. Not a disaster, not a runaway hit, more like a beautiful oddball that kept scratching its way into cult status. And honestly, Schrader has a lot of those. Films that are truly incredible in hindsight, but at the time, people didn't seem to appreciate them nearly enough. Of course, then he has films that were universally loved, so take it for what it is. I mean, as a writer, he gave us Taxi Driver, Rolling Thunder, Raging Bull, The Last Temptation of Christ, and then a laundry list of great films that had to be kind of learned to be loved later. A couple of my favorites would be Light Sleeper or Autofocus. When his name is on the work, it's probably worth giving a shot. So if you've never seen the 1982 Cat People remake, you should really check it out. It's available to rent or buy at the usual suspects, as I've said so many times. Amazon Prime Video, Apple TV, and Fandango at home. You can rent it or buy it. Either way, you're in for a good time. And watch out because the kitty has claws. On April 2nd, 2020, Cursed Films premieres on the Shudder streaming service and taps directly into one of horror fandom's favorite obsessions. Not just scary movies, but the idea that some scary films somehow brought something awful home with them. What's smart about the series is that it doesn't just wallow in spooky trivia, it digs into the machinery of the myth. Why do these stories survive? Things like The Crow being cursed or Poltergeist being cursed. Why do we keep passing them around? And what happens when real tragedy gets mixed up with campfire story mentality and sold back to us as a curse? That makes Cursed Films a perfect horror history entry, and as you know, that's something I care about quite a bit. And it's not just about genre titles, it's about the stories horror fans tell each other. About the genre itself, one of my favorite episodes, by the way, is when they dive into The Wizard of Oz. It gets pretty fascinating and pretty damn dark. And of course, it's streaming currently on Shudder, where it was premiered and where it'll probably be forever. But you can also get it on AMC Plus, so check it out if you need a docuseries to keep you on the edge of your seat. On April 5th, 2019, Pet Sematary opens in the US. Well, it's a remake, but I think you already knew that. It proved once again that Stephen King plus grief plus one very bad idea is still a very powerful horror recipe. In no way does this film replace the 1989 version in fans' hearts, but it does understand the core sickness of the premise, the desperate human belief that maybe this one rule can be broken. Maybe death can be negotiated with. Maybe love can out-argue the grave. And horror, being horror, answers that with a hard no. And while some people hated the film and some people loved it, as we'll see from the box office numbers, I thought it was a pretty effective remake, a retelling of the original novel. I had a lot of fun with it, although that 1989 one and the sequel in the 90s, they still get to me in a way that I don't think anything modern really could. Financially, it was a clear hit. It did around $113 million worldwide on a $21 million budget. That's not just decent business, that's the kind of return that proves the title still has claws. I'm laughing because I improvised that line earlier and about claws, and I had already written a reference about claws, but I'm leaving it in because this is charming. Yeah, it's charming. If you want to check out the 2019 Pet Sematary or revisit it, because, sometimes dead is better, you can stream it on Paramount Plus or rent or buy it on Apple TV and Fandango at home. Tomorrow on Weekly Spooky is no April Fool's prank. We're telling a story all about a man chasing a mysterious ley line through the back roads of the Midwest. He's expecting strange readings, but he doesn't expect the line to bend where it never should, or to lead him to a castle that has no business existing there. And he definitely does not expect a beautiful woman in distress to come running out of the darkness, begging him to save her from a monster sleeping in the dungeon below. But the deeper he goes into that castle, the less anything makes sense. A frightened father, a seductive stranger, a coffin in the dark, and the creeping feeling that every step forward is leading him straight into a trap designed just for him. This Wednesday, tomorrow on Weekly Spooky for April Fool's Day, we've got a horror story that starts like a gothic nightmare and keeps twisting into something stranger, funnier, and far more dangerous than anyone should trust after midnight. It's Fooled Ya by Douglas Waltz. So tune in tomorrow, make sure you're subscribed, and remember, on April Fool's Day, the joke might be on you. All right, Spookies, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're heading into our deep cut spotlight. We'll be creeping into the world of Resident Evil, not the slow burn mansion or the creeping police station dread. This one is a panic attack with sirens, a collapsing city, and one unstoppable monster who feels less like a boss battle and more like bad news that learned how to walk. We're back, my spookies, so let's get into it. On April 3rd, 2020, Resident Evil 3 drops on PlayStation 4, Windows, and Xbox One, and for a lot of horror fans, it lands like a shot of pure Raccoon City adrenaline. Resident Evil 2 is the locked door nightmare, but Part 3 is the nightmare that kicks the door off the hinges. Everything about this one is built around momentum. Jill Valentine isn't creeping through a haunted space so much as trying to stay half a step ahead of total civic collapse. Streets are on fire, systems are failing, escape routes keep shrinking. And Nemesis is the perfect monster for that kind of game because he doesn't just scare you so much as he interrupts you. And honestly, that's the real charm of Resident Evil 3. It understands pressure. Even people who were mixed on it usually agree on the basics. It looks great, it moves fast, and when it hits, it absolutely nails that hunted, cornered feeling that the series has always done so well. It's the kind of remake that may not satisfy everybody equally, but what Remake does, but it still manages to capture the mood of being trapped in a disaster that's already bigger than you or anyone can fix. And honestly, that makes it great for a deep cut, because late March and early April are full of horror entries that feel like boundaries giving way, and Resident Evil 3 is basically an entire game about the moment the barricades stop mattering. As far as how to play it, it's available on PlayStation through their store, or Xbox, or Steam, so you gamers already know how to get your hands on it, so why not play today and see if you can escape Raccoon City? Let's dive into some spooky horror birthdays. So light a black candle and put it in the cake. On March 30th, 1957, Tawny Moyer is born, forever remembered by horror fans as Nurse Jill in Halloween 2, a film that honestly does deserve a lot more love than it gets. It's a lot of fun, and it's a great, thrilling, and mean-spirited follow-up to the original legendary classic. A very happy birthday to Tawny Moyer. On March 31st, 1943, Christopher Walken is born, a man whose genre stops include The Dead Zone and Sleepy Hollow, a man who can make almost any line sound oddly supernatural. And I'm not going to try to do an impression of his voice because I've never been able to nail the cadence, but he always makes a role memorable, and that includes his horror films. So a very happy birthday, Christopher Walken. On April 1st, 1883, Lon Chaney is born, the silent-era legend whose transformative performances in The Phantom of the Opera and The Hunchback of Notre Dame helped to define horror stardom. The man is an absolute icon, and even his son brought an incredible amount to the genre and to film as a whole, so if you get a chance, crack open your favorite old black-and-white horror movie over the weekend or whenever you're off work and enjoy a little bit of that fun and cozy dread, because a lot of it started with Lon Chaney. So happy birthday, Mr. Chaney. And speaking of horror icons, on April 4th, 1932, Anthony Perkins is born, the beautifully unsettling soul of Psycho, and one of horror's all-time great faces of everything. Right, Mother? Right, Mother? And also I want to mention, if you've never seen the Psycho sequels, they are really worth your time. Anthony Perkins reprises his role very well and even brings a great degree of empathy to the lovable Psycho, and he directed Part 3, which in my opinion is just 80s as hell in the best possible way. A very happy birthday to Anthony Perkins. Our Then and Now this week gives us horror in 4 escalating forms. First, infestation. Something alien gets inside the body and turns a town into meat. Then, desire. Something ancient and animal turns longing into danger. Then, myth. We stop asking whether horror stories are true and start asking why we want them to be true. And then finally, grief, the oldest trap in the genre, bringing back what should have stayed gone. And right in the middle of all of that, Resident Evil 3 gives us the panic version, the moment containment fails and horror stops lurking in the shadows, because it no longer has to. And for our weekly recommendation, published on April 5th, 1974, the immortal classic, Carrie. If you want a perfect companion piece for this week, go back to April 5th, 1974 with Stephen King. It's easy to talk about Carrie as the first big Stephen King book, and it's completely true, but it's also a brutal blueprint for so much of what modern horror became. Humiliation, repression, cruelty, adolescence, religion, power, vengeance, all of it building toward one of the most inevitable and striking catastrophes in the genre. What still hurts about Carrie is that the monster and the victim are the same girl. That's the rub, that's the sting, and that's why it lasts. And it fits this week beautifully because so many of these titles are about a line being crossed. One bad decision, one unlocked urge, one fatal act of cruelty, one resurrection too many. And Carrie may be one of the greatest you should have stopped before this point horror stories ever written. It's available in hardcover, paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. They're all delightful ways to enjoy the Stephen King classic. That's your trip through March 30th through April 5th in horror history. Remember, tomorrow on Weekly Spooky, we'll have a fresh horror story all about April Fools that is more than you bargained for. And make sure you're subscribed, because on Friday we have a little surprise for you. On Saturday, we have a collection of horror stories from the Weekly Spooky Vault for you to enjoy. Sunday, there's the Unknown Broadcast, which I still don't know where it comes from or why it always returns, but it's there for you. And then on Monday, a brand new true crime horror story about an exorcism gone deadly. So until next time, remember, our days are numbered, because that's how we tell them apart. See you next week.